Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is the place where we dig into complex ideas from philosophy, from cybernetics, from psychology, and really try to turn them into knowledge that you can actually use to navigate, well, what feels like an increasingly noisy world.
And today we're taking on a massive project. It's a question that you hear everywhere, but it feels particularly sharp right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's this deep-seated crisis of meaning.
That's it. Yeah, our sources for this deep dive, they describe it as the primary cry of our time for uniting narrative. And you see it everywhere, this feeling that modern life, and especially our hyper-connected screen-mediated life, just feels empty.
Yeah, hollow. Divorced from any real purpose.
Exactly. So our goal today is to really get rigorous about what meaning even is. We're going to try to move away from this idea that meaning is some kind of, I don't know, static object you just find somewhere.
Right, like it's under a rock or something.
Yeah. Instead, we're going to define it as an experience. Specifically, an experience of dynamic transformation that your own mind and body generate when you're actively pursuing a very particular kind of goal.
And we're going to use this really constrained framework that pulls from some unexpected places. You've got the hard engineering logic of cybernetics on one hand,
Right.
and the deep experiential philosophy of phenomenology on the other. And we're going to use them to explore a pretty radical idea.
Which is that the very tools we use constantly to connect with each other, our phones, our devices, might actually be systematically undermining the very mechanisms that are supposed to generate that sense of purpose in the first place.
Mm-hmm. So the fundamental question we're really chasing today is this. What happens when a society starts to prioritize the objective material world, what things are made of, over the primary reality of what we actually do?
Over action and experience.
Exactly. And how does that choice end up influencing the actual quality of our lives, minute by minute? So let's start by unpacking that huge shift in perspective.
Okay, so let's start right there with this foundational conflict. The sources we're looking at suggest there are really two primary ways of seeing the world, and that the modern West, basically since the scientific revolution, has thrown all of its weight behind one of them.
That's exactly right. The dominant view, the one we all sort of swim in, is what we can call the materialist perspective.
Okay.
This is the perspective that asks the question, what is the world fundamentally made of? What is the objective substratum underneath everything?
So, physics, chemistry.
Exactly. It's the domain of pure objective measurement. It's trying to define what existence is, completely independent of a conscious person looking at it.
And you can't deny its success, right? I mean, in terms of building technology, understanding physical laws, manipulating the world. It's been a total triumph.
An undeniable triumph. But then there's the other way of seeing, the one that's been sort of pushed to the side.
The action-based perspective.
The action-based perspective. And this way, it flips the question completely on its head. It doesn't ask what the world is made of. It asks, how should I act in the world right now?
Okay.
If you think about it, if you're a living creature, which, we are, your entire existence is based on movement, on survival, on interaction. So from that point of view, figuring out how to act is arguably the most primary reality you have.
More primary than what the atoms are doing.
Maybe. I mean, it's arguably of primary importance, regardless of what the atoms are doing underneath it all.
Okay, help me get my head around why this is more than just, a semantic game. If the world is objectively made of atoms, why would the action-based view be considered more real for a person?
Well, because for us as living things, that material existence is kind of secondary to the constant problem we have to solve, which is the problem of navigation.
The problem of navigation.
Yeah. If you're alive, you are in a constant state of moving from where you are now. We can call that point A, which is always insufficient in some way.
Right. I'm hungry, I'm cold, I'm bored.
Exactly. You're always moving from that point A toward a better future state, a point B. And so your reality, your lived reality, is structured entirely around that journey. Your perception, your memory, what you pay attention to, everything is organized to help you move.
So if you stop moving, or you can't figure out where to go,
you die. It's that simple. You die, regardless of how objectively beautiful or interesting the physical world around you is. The navigational problem comes first.
So our biological reality, our mandate to just stay alive, forces the action-based view to be the primary one.
It does, and this leads directly to a really crucial idea. Perception isn't passive. It's not just observation.
Perception is action predicated.
That's the phrase. We're not just sitting back and letting photons hit our retinas like a camera passively recording whatever's there. We are active search engines.
Okay, I like that metaphor.
The biology of the visual system actually demonstrates this. Your eyes, even when you think you're staring at something, are constantly making these tiny, rapid movements. They're called saccades. You're actively sampling the environment. You're looking for targets. There's literally no perception without an intention to act, even if that action is just paying attention.
Let's ground this with an example.
Hmm.
If I'm in a really busy place, say a huge train station like Grand Central, I'm just being flooded with sensory data.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not paying attention to the subtle difference in the color of the floor tiles or the exact pitch of some announcement happening way over on the other side.
No, of course not. Your attention, which is like this incredibly powerful spotlight, it immediately hones in only on what is of import to you relative to your goal.
So if my goal is to catch the 5.15 to New Haven,
Then you're filtering for platform signs, gate numbers, maybe the face of the ticket agent you need to talk to, everything else, all that infinite noise, the conversations, the dust floating in the air, the specific shadows on the wall, it all gets ignored. It's just pushed to the periphery.
unless something strange happens.
Unless, as the phenomenologist would say, something strange happens. A sudden loud noise, a bright flash of light, something that signals potential danger or opportunity, which forces you to reevaluate your frame.
This concept, which you call the problem of infinite detail, it seems absolutely central here. Why is it so disastrous to just try and attend to everything?
Because you would drown. Instantly. If we were required to perceive the world in all of its objective material detail, our brains would just shut down.
Okay, explain that.
Well, think about trying to describe a single simple object, like, say, a black curtain over there. If you look at it really closely, you realize there is no such thing as an objectively uniform black.
Right, there's light hitting it, there are folds, little bits of dust.
Exactly. There are subtle gradations of shadow, reflected light from the room, tiny wrinkles, dust particles. You have a virtually infinite amount of visual data in that one small patch of fabric.
And if your nervous system tried to process all of that for every object in your field of view,
You'd be paralyzed. Your decision-making capacity would just stall out. You couldn't move.
so to function, to act, to survive, we have to be ruthless, we have to frame our perception.
We need a structure, an intentional filter, one that lets us throw away the indefinite number of details and focus only on what is relevant to our aim, to our goal.
And it's this structure, this frame, that pulls us out of the overwhelming chaos of the material world and puts us into the manageable, navigable world of action.
That's the brain's fundamental move. It says, I am going to ignore 99.999% of reality because only this tiny fraction is what I need to get from point A to point B.
So that frame, that filter, that is our reality.
It's the structure of your lived experience, and that implication is just profound. You aren't experiencing objective reality. You are experiencing reality as it is structured by your aims.
Okay, so if action forces us into a frame, then that frame itself must have a very specific kind of optimized structure. And this is where things get really interesting, because this is where engineering and philosophy suddenly converge.
They really do. This necessity of framing our experience leads us directly to what the sources call the simple frame, or the goal structure. And any navigating system, it doesn't matter if it's a human being or a guided missile, it has to embody these three dynamic parts.
Let's lay them out. First is point A.
Point A, the situated self, the recognition of, here I am now, your current position.
Then point B, the destination, the goal, that high-value future state you're trying to get to, where I'm going.
And this is the critical third piece, the strategy. This is the plan. It's how you organize your attention and your action specifically to decrease the gap between point A and point B. The whole thing is dynamic. It's constantly updating.
It sounds almost mechanical when you put it that way, and I guess that's because this framework was first really formalized in a mechanical context, wasn't it?
It was. This is a cybernetic viewpoint pioneered by a brilliant guy named Norbert Wiener during World War II.
He was working on, what, missile systems?
Anti-aircraft missile control systems. Yeah, he's one of the founders of computation. And think about that missile. Its goal is the target. That's its point B. It establishes a predicted trajectory, and the system's entire reason for being is error correction.
Right.
It's constantly comparing where it is now to its ideal path, calculating the error, and then adjusting its fins and its thrusters to decrease that error
Until the error is zero.
until the error is zero and the target is hit. It's a machine that is completely driven by its goal and that feedback loop of detecting its own errors.
Aim, fire, monitor the error, correct, repeat. It's so simple and elegant. And the argument here is that our nervous system, our whole way of perceiving, is functionally identical to that missile guidance system.
Fundamentally, yes. Our nervous system is just an embodied biological cybernetic system. It's designed to navigate reality by minimizing the error between where we are and where we want to be.
But here's the question. Where does the desired future state come from? Where does the value come from? A missile's target is given to it. Who gives us ours?
And that is exactly where the phenomenologists come in.
So let's turn to Husserl and Heidegger. They weren't looking at missile systems. They were looking at the human experience, and they were worried.
They were deeply troubled by the success of the scientific revolution. They argued that by prioritizing the objective material world, science had sort of unintentionally pushed all of subjective human experience, our goals, our suffering, our love, into what they called an abyss of uncertainty and meaninglessness.
Because if only the material world is real, then what are all those things? What is meaning?
Well, the scientific worldview at the time basically said your feelings, they're just, secondary byproducts. They're epiphenomena of the real chemical processes in your brain.
But you can't live a life of value if you actually believe that. It's an impossible position.
It is. So their response, the phenomenological response, was to just prioritize experience as such. They said, hold on a second. Even the basic sense data that the empiricists claim is objective, well, that's dependent on perception. And perception is dependent on action. And action is dependent on a goal. And a goal is dependent on value.
So you can't get away from value. It's at the bottom of the whole stack.
It's at the bottom. Therefore, they said, this whole concept of a purely objective world, devoid of a perceiver who is embedded in a world of value, it's just not philosophically or practically tenable. Experience has to be primary.
So meaning isn't something you add on to the world. It's the very structure through which you perceive the world in the first place.
Precisely. And this gets to their definition of the word phenomena. It's a beautiful word. It comes from the Greek phanestai, which means to shine forth or to appear.
So it's not just something that exists. It's something that grabs you. It demands your attention.
Yes. The example in the source material is so poetic. It's the burning bush from the story of Exodus. It's not just a bush. It's a bush that is on fire but not being consumed, and it is demanding to be seen. It shines forth.
Things shout out at us.
They shout out to us. They become relevant precisely because of our aims. Let's use a more concrete example. Imagine you're walking quickly across a busy room to greet a friend.
Okay.
The floor tiles under your feet are neutral. They don't shout. But then you trip over a loose power cord that you didn't see.
Right. That cord suddenly becomes the most important thing in the universe.
It immediately becomes a phenomenon. It shines forth, it demands your attention, and it registers as intensely negative.
And the reason it registers as negative is because it's an error. It's a sudden, unpredicted deviation from my nice, smooth path from point A to point B.
Which connects us right back to the cybernetic loop. And this is why we can start to think of our emotions as a trajectory adjustment system.
Oh.
A trajectory adjustment system. Your emotions are the built-in primal feedback loop that tells you how well you're doing at closing the gap to your target.
So if that anti-missile missile we were talking about it would feel unhappy or anxious when it veered off course.
Yes, that's it exactly. Positive emotion is the internal signal that confirms the strategy is working, the frame is valid, we're closing the gap. It's the intrinsic reward that validates your movement.
And negative emotion, anxiety, frustration, disappointment. That's the urgent alarm bell saying error. Error detected. We're off path. Or worse, the whole strategy is wrong.
And this system isn't optional. If you ignore your negative emotional feedback, you're basically ignoring the most primal warning system you have that your entire navigational frame might be flawed.
So if your world consistently makes you feel anxious or stressed or dissatisfied,
It's a massive signal. It's a phenomenon shouting at you that your goal structure, your point B, or the strategy you're using to get there is fundamentally out of alignment with reality,
and you're forced to adjust the frame.
you have to.
So the big takeaway here seems to be that a meaningful life requires this high-resolution, dynamic frame aimed at a specific destination, and it's constantly being calibrated by your emotions.
That's the core of it. Now let's look at the structure of that frame and its relationship to the vast infinite reality that we've had to filter out. We mentioned that our focus is high resolution right at the center.
Right, the fovea.
But as you move out, the periphery dissolves into lower and lower resolution until eventually it just becomes the void.
And that center point,
Yeah.
what you're focusing on, it has to be intensely relevant. It has to be important in relationship to your goal.
Yeah.
Because if the thing you're attending to suddenly seems meaningless,
Your attention just collapses, it falls back into the void. That's the experience of boredom or distraction. Your frame has broken down.
okay, so this converged finding from cybernetics, phenomenology, perceptual psychology, is that we are creatures who exist inside a frame of perception that's organized around a goal.
Yes. And what do we call a description of a frame like that? A description of a character moving from point A to point B, overcoming obstacles with a particular strategy.
It's a story.
It's a story. A story is a navigational map. It details the present, the destination, the challenges you'll face, and the tools you have.
And this is where even the big postmodern critique comes in. They correctly pointed out that there's no single universal story with a capital S.
Right.
But they also agreed that every human action, whether it's planting a garden or running a scientific experiment, is nested inside some kind of story structure.
Absolutely. If you're a scientist, your actions are nested inside the story that says, knowledge is valuable and understanding the world will make things better. If you suddenly decide to use your scientific knowledge to make things worse,
You instantly become the villain.
you become the villain because you violated the assumed story frame of the entire enterprise.
This also explains why fiction is so incredibly compelling. When we watch a movie or read a book, we're essentially, hijacking the protagonist's frame of perception.
That's a perfect way to put it. We infer their goals, we see their strategy, we adopt their perspective, and we feel their emotions vicariously.
So it's like we're experimenting with a navigational frame, but without any of the real-world risk.
Exactly. We're biologically testing the value and the robustness of a particular story, of a particular way of being in the world, without having to spend our own energy or face the real consequences. We're learning which frames hold up under pressure.
Okay, so let's get to the engine of the story, the thing that propels it forward. Value. Why move at all? The answer seems to be because the present state now is never quite good enough.
It's always pitched toward what should be. And this creates what the sources call an inescapable value gradient.
A value gradient.
Movement always has to be from a lesser place to a greater place. If point B isn't better than point A, there's no reason, no intrinsic motivation to spend the immense energy it takes to act. If the reward doesn't justify the cost, the whole system just stalls.
So the destination has to be valuable enough to warrant the cost of the journey, the cost of filtering out all that infinite data, and the cost of overcoming whatever gets in your way.
And we, as navigating creatures, we have to signal that value, both to ourselves and to others. We do it through the expenditure of energy. The source material has this remarkable analogy about honeybees.
Yeah, the waggle dance. Yes. Let's go deep on this. So the bees find a source of food, a flower patch.
And they fly back to the hive to communicate the location and, importantly, the richness of that source to the other bees.
And they do it with this dance.
Yes, the famous waggle dance. The bee performs this complex figure-8 pattern, and it's expending a lot of physical energy to do it. But here's the crucial part. The duration and the intensity of the waggle, the sheer amount of energy the bee puts into the dance, is directly proportional to the richness of the flower bed.
Wow. So it's not just here's where it is, it's here's where it is. And it's so amazing that it's worth all this effort I'm putting in to tell you about it.
The bee is signaling the richness, the worth of the destination, with its own willingness to spend energy.
That is a perfect biological parallel for human enthusiasm.
It's exactly the same mechanism. When you see a speaker who's animated and passionate, pouring out energy when they're explaining their goal or telling their story, they are signaling that they genuinely believe the destination is worth the investment.
And that energy expenditure, it also confirms the meaning of the goal to yourself.
Yes. We call that signal enthusiasm, which etymologically, it comes from antheos. It means possessed by the divine. If you set a goal for yourself and you feel no forward-moving impulse, no internal enthusiastic signal.
You have no heart for the adventure.
Exactly. It means the goal is too low value to justify the climb. The system isn't generating the energy.
This is so important. It moves us beyond just acquiring value, like getting the honey, to something else.
Yeah.
To developmental transformation. The best goals aren't just about getting something. They have to change the person who's pursuing them.
This is the principle of optimal challenge. The best possible goals don't just give you a prize at the end, they transform you. They increase your capability, which allows you to then pause it and pursue even better, more complex goals in the future.
It sounds just like kids playing. For a child, play isn't really about winning the game. It's about making the game just hard enough to be interesting.
That's it exactly. The source is very precise here. For an activity to be meaningful, it must be as difficult as possible while maintaining maximal enthusiasm.
Right. Too easy, it's boring, no transformation. Too hard, you get anxious and you quit.
Meaning lives right on that boundary. It's pushing you to the absolute edge of your current capability.
So meaning is the reward signal you get for pursuing a path that forces you to grow.
Yeah.
And this upward path, this spiral, is what the source calls the stairway to heaven, or Jacob's ladder.
It's a game that gets better and more complex the better you get at playing it, which leads to a pretty sobering implication.
Which is?
If the world seems unbearable to you, if it seems unacceptable or devoid of meaning, this framework suggests that your aim is misaligned. Your goal is either too low or it's based on a flawed understanding of yourself or the world.
And this connects directly to ideas about morality and sin.
It does. The ancient Greek word for sin, Hummeria, it doesn't mean evil in the way we think of it. It's an archery term. It literally means to miss the target or aim.
So if you aim at a worthwhile goal and you miss, you feel negative emotion, and that forces you to adjust your strategy.
Right. But if you're aiming at the wrong target altogether, your entire world structure can collapse into anxiety and meaninglessness.
So the path forward, the developmental path, involves confronting that misalignment. The source talks about repenting and atoning.
Which means becoming at one with reality. It means replacing the misaligned aim with a higher one, a more transformative one.
And if we can get good at this process, at consistently adjusting our aim for the better, that's what leads to wisdom.
Yes, and wisdom in this framework isn't just about collecting facts.
So how is it defined?
Wisdom is defined as having a good meta-strategy. It's pursuing a path that improves the probability that you will properly specify what you pursue in the future.
So it's not just about reaching one destination. It's about getting better at choosing all your future destinations, improving the entire navigation system.
Exactly. And this frame, it isn't arbitrary. It's not just do whatever feels good. The constraints on a meaningful frame are incredibly tight. It's not relativistic at all.
What are the constraints?
Well, there are three non-negotiable criteria. One, it has to work for you to thrive. Now, in the medium term and in the long run.
Okay.
Two, it has to work with the other people around you so that they can thrive too. It has to be able to harmonize a multiplicity of people.
And three, and this is maybe the hardest one, the frame itself has to improve as you implement it. It has to grow in complexity and value. It can't be static.
Children learn this optimized frame through play. Play is just the process of harmonizing yourself and others under these very tight constraints. So, to sum up this huge conceptual leap before we apply it, meaning is that energetic, enthusiastic signal you feel when you are engaged in embodied action that is optimally challenging, that's forcing you to transform, and that's aligned toward a high-value, sustainable goal.
Okay. We have built this entire complex engine of meaning. It's dynamic. It's high fidelity. It's a high-energy process that requires transformation. So now for the application. What happens when we try to conduct a huge portion of our most important interactions, our social connections, our emotional negotiations, our professional lives, through devices that seem to systematically strip away the key requirements of this very framework?
What happens is we find that the modern crisis of meaning isn't some, cosmic curse. It's a structural failure. The very tools that we've built for connection are systematically denying us the essential components of meaning. The challenge, the embodied action, and that high-fidelity aim alignment.
All right, let's break this down. Let's start with deficit number one. The absence of optimal challenge. The whole low-risk, low-reward problem.
Okay, so remember the principle of optimal challenge. The pursuit has to be as difficult as possible while maintaining maximal enthusiasm. This is why successfully navigating a really serious conflict with a loved one, face-to-face, feels so meaningful when you get it right.
Or leading a critical meeting at work that goes really well.
Yes. The stakes are high. The transformation required of you in that moment is intense. You are forced to regulate your own physiology, read incredibly subtle cues from other people, adjust your speech in real time, manage unexpected emotional flare-ups.
Your entire system is operating right at the edge of its development.
But communicating through a device, texting, sending a voice note, even a video call to some extent, is inherently low risk. The emotional cost of getting it wrong is massively buffered.
Right.
All of that complex, instantaneous, embodied social navigation that forces you to adapt psychologically, it's mostly gone.
You can write a really harsh email, and then you can read it, delete it, edit it 10 times, and only then send this polished, buffered, asynchronous thing.
Yeah.
You completely avoid the immediate pressure of a real confrontation.
You don't have to deal with the data of the other person's flushed face or the way they start nervously shifting in their seat right now. And because that risk is so low, the requirement for you to genuinely adapt is minimal.
Your actions aren't pushing you to the edge of development.
No. They're not forcing a deep, difficult reevaluation of your strategy or your social aims. And if you're not forced to transform, you don't grow.
And if you don't grow, then that enthusiastic signal of intrinsic meaning, the reward for meeting the optimal challenge, it never shows up. You just get this low-stakes interaction that provides, I don't know, a temporary distraction, but not that deep, energetic feeling of purpose that comes from actually climbing the ladder.
It creates this horrible feedback loop of chronic, low-level dissatisfaction. We're interacting constantly, we're spending all this energy, but because the stakes are so low and the challenge is so minimal, the system never generates that maximal enthusiasm signal. We end up feeling busy, but hollow.
That makes perfect sense.
Mhm.
Okay, let's move to the second one, deficit number 2, failure of accurate aim alignment. Basically, missing the target because our tools are bad.
Right. So the goal of any social interaction is to very quickly and accurately figure out the other person's frame of reference, their goal. You need to know what they're aiming at so you can coordinate your actions with theirs.
And the sources for this dive really highlight the evolutionary importance of the eye in all of this. The face as a value display system.
Oh, it's just fascinating evolutionary biology. Humans are unique among primates because we have a highly visible white sclera, the white part of the eye around our dark pupil.
Most other primates have dark eyes.
Yeah.
It's harder to see where they're looking.
Exactly. Their gaze direction is camouflaged. So the question is, why did evolution select for our eyes to be so visible? And the answer seems to be so that other humans can track exactly what we are pointing to with our gaze.
So our eyes aren't just for seeing, they're for signaling. They're like a literal arrow pointing at the object of our attention, telling everyone else, this is valuable, look at this.
And understanding that precise object of the other person's attention, their aim, and reading their instantaneous, high-fidelity emotional response is described as the most important thing you can derive from an interaction. It lets you inhabit their frame of reference.
You can adopt their emotions, you can really understand them.
But when you take that incredible high-resolution instant 3D feedback system and you reduce it to abstract black and white text or a little emoji or even a grainy lagging video call, you just lose all that crucial navigational data.
So device communication forces the person on the other end to just guess.
Yes. You're forced to guess the sender's true aim, their real value proposition, their exact emotional state, all from these fragmented, abstracted signals. Was that text message sarcastic? Are they actually angry, or are they just in a rush? Did they miss the meeting because they don't value it, or because their car genuinely broke down?
If our main way of communicating is based on guesswork, then our whole social frame of perception is just constantly misaligned with reality. We're acting on bad data.
And to bring it back to the Greek term, a frame that is misaligned with reality is hamartia. It's missing the target. And the consequence of chronically missing the target in your social life, especially in important relationships, is a world that starts to seem fundamentally unacceptable and devoid of meaning.
You can't see the path forward because you can't get an accurate reading of where you are in relation to everyone else. So you can't calibrate your own goals correctly.
Exactly.
You know, I want to circle back to that Jiminy Cricket analogy from the sources because I think it perfectly illustrates this failure of aim-onment in a lo-fi environment.
It's such a powerful metaphor for how the conscience develops. When the story starts, Pinocchio's conscience, Jiminy Cricket, he's just a generic, shallow tramp. He's full of useless cliches and bad advice.
He's low fidelity and untransformed.
And he's supposed to become wise to earn that gold star. But the story implies he doesn't get wise by sitting alone reading a book. He gets wise through the active, high-stakes dialogue and transformation that he undergoes with Pinocchio out in the real, dangerous world.
So if our own internal conscience, our inner guide for proper aim and action, if it requires high-fidelity interaction and real struggle and genuine dialogue to go from being a generic tramp to a star-worthy guide, what happens when our most frequent, highest-value interactions are all mediated by these low-fidelity buffered signals?
It suggests that our internalized guide, our sort of digital age conscience, it just stays generic. It stays untransformed and inaccurate. We're constantly getting bad navigational advice because we've deprived the guide of the high-resolution, challenging feedback loop it needed to become wise.
We're just left aiming poorly, over and over again.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy of meaninglessness. We choose the tools for their efficiency, but they destroy the very information we need for wisdom.
Okay, let's get to the final piece. Deficit number 3. Lack of embodied action. This idea that for meaning to exist, the abstract idea has to actually hit the ground.
The transformation from what is, the lesser place, to what should be, the goal, it has to be made manifest in the physical, corporal world. The action itself is the point where the abstract idea stops being abstract.
This is that poetic idea of the incarnation of the spirit in the corporal world. You have to move your strategy out of your head and into physical reality, where it gets tested against real constraints.
And those physical constraints are non-negotiable. If you set a goal, let's say to build a complex piece of furniture, you then have to actually lift the wood, measure the dimensions, exert physical effort, and fight against gravity and friction.
And that real, tangible resistance is what validates the frame. When you're done, the feeling of meaning you get is tied to the physical overcoming of real-world obstacles.
But in our connected lives, we so often replace genuine physical movement and effort with just sending a signal to a device.
Give me an example.
Okay, think about the difference between physically walking across town in the rain to deliver some important news to a friend versus just pressing send on a long text message.
Goal is the same. Communication, connection.
The goal is the same, but the action is fundamentally different. The act of walking across town, navigating the weather, the traffic, the obstacles, spending your own energy, it forces the goal to be embodied. You feel the physical weight and importance of the message.
Whereas pressing send just bypasses that physical test completely.
Hmm.
The movement required is negligible.
And this lack of genuine, challenging movement prevents the goal from being truly embodied and validated in the real world. The upward aim just stays abstract. It's a concept floating in the digital ether, and it never receives that crucial validation through the enthusiastic, deeply meaningful feeling that comes from overcoming a real physical constraint.
The journey gets short-circuited, all in the name of efficiency. So if a meaningful goal requires an optimal challenge that forces transformation, and if that transformation has to be grounded in real-world embodied action, then our constant reliance on low-risk, disembodied, low-fidelity digital signals is structurally guaranteeing an experience devoid of meaning.
It seems that way. We're essentially choosing the easiest, fastest path every time, which is the precise opposite of the optimal challenge required for meaning.
The systems that generate meaning are hardwired into us. They demand effort, they demand risk, and they demand high-fidelity information. And when we build tools that systematically bypass all of those requirements, we really shouldn't be surprised when we're left with a feeling of constant motion and connection, but also profound emptiness.
The void is just the natural consequence of trying to operate outside the necessary constraints of a meaningful human frame.
Okay, let's try to synthesize this whole complex framework. We started by defining our experience of reality as being fundamentally narrative, action-based, and goal-oriented. And it's all validated by this very precise emotional feedback system.
And from there, we found that this modern crisis of meaning seems to be a structural failure that's directly related to our navigational tools. The very tools we use for our connected lives systematically exclude the high-risk action, the high-fidelity aim alignment, and the embodied movement that are all required to generate that powerful intrinsic feeling of purpose.
That maximal enthusiasm signal.
Exactly.
The story that we inhabit, this human frame, it demands challenge, it requires genuine effort, and it needs a crystal clear, high-fidelity understanding of the goals and value systems of the people we're interacting with. When we strip all of that away in the name of efficiency, we're also stripping away the opportunity for authentic meaning and for real developmental growth.
It really is the ultimate irony, isn't it? We created these systems that were designed to maximize connection and minimize friction. But it turns out that meaning requires friction. It requires the resistance of the real world and the difficulty of accurate, embodied social navigation to validate our goals.
And that brings us back to that really powerful final thought to leave you with, which is rooted in the very mechanisms we've just explored. We talked about how Pinocchio's conscience, Jiminy Cricket, he started out as this generic, unhelpful guide, a shallow tramp.
Mm-hmm. And he only became wise. He only earned his gold star through the high-stakes, transformative struggle he went through alongside the puppet.
So if even our own internalized moral compass, our system for aligning our aim needs that kind of high-fidelity dialogue and embodied transformation to become properly attuned, we have to ask ourselves, what conversation are we avoiding? What essential high-risk struggle are we just substituting with a low-stakes digital signal?
And if that generic digital signal is the initial shallow tramp,
What genuine embodied struggle, what challenging high-stakes interaction is required to turn that generic low-fidelity signal into a meaningful, star-worthy guide? A guide that could actually help us calibrate our aim against the demanding constraints of reality.
and maybe the most crucial question of all, are we willing to face the necessary friction to earn that star?